This is the lecture for Ancient and Medieval History for Tuesday, the 11th of January, 2022. Outside of the English-speaking world, what we would call political corruption is the norm. We assume that a person's identity should matter less than what they contribute to a given situation. But throughout most of the world, family connections, personal obligations, paying a little bribe money here, extorting a little bit of support there, is the normal way of doing business. In other words, in most countries, it makes sense for a politician to go into office poor and come out rich, even though they have no other visible source of income than their salary, which is low. One of the aspects of this personal way of doing business, which again, we in the English-speaking world would call corrupt, the Germans qualify as the English-speaking world as far as this is concerned too. They don't do business like this, usually. Is patron-client relationships. In society, you have powerful older men. They have money, they have connections, they have influence, they have presumably earned wisdom. You also have young, ambitious men. They want to someday be powerful older men with money and influence and presumably wisdom. What they have to offer is loyalty. So the client and the patron come to an arrangement. The patron will provide money, wisdom, guidance, make connections, so that the young man's career can blossom. In return, the young man owes the older man duty, loyalty, obligation. And this is the case still in Japan, in Italy, and throughout much of the world. So understand, what you're about to see in the opening scenes of the 1970 movie, The Godfather, is set in the 1940s New York, right after World War II. And what it involves is an undertaker, an Italian undertaker, going to the house of Don Vito Corleone. Don is the title of honor, like the Honorable. Don Vito Corleone's daughter is getting married. The story is that the Sicilian can refuse no request on the day of his daughter's wedding. The undertaker has a problem. He needs the help of the crime lord. But the undertaker has been Americanized. The crime lord is still very Sicilian. The undertaker thinks he's about to do a business deal for money. The crime lord understands it's not about money. It's a patron-client relationship, which is all about loyalty. I'm going to pause the video while we see the movie. Clip. There's a lot going on in the scene. The undertaker expects that like everything else in America, it's about money, price. How much shall I pay you? But that isn't what it's about. What it's about is a personal obligation. You offer, with respect, your friendship. You offer, with humility, with the kissing of the ring, your loyalty. It's not new world. It's very old world. And this is the way Rome worked. Duties of obligation. I'll come back to that. I'm going to show it to you again because I want you to see the subtleties at work. I've seen this scene many times, and I still learn things as I watch. Now, a few things. First off, how does the daughter keep her honor? She fights them. Old world, not America, is that courtship is done under the supervision of both families and that there's no hanky-panky before wedding. In America, it's different. You go out on car dates, you go to the movies, you stay out to a certain hour, maybe beyond a certain hour. It's much more free and loose. But these two boys tried taking advantage of this girl. Had she given in without a fight, she would have lost her honor, and the father and the family would have been disgraced, according to the old rules. But she fights them, makes them angry. In doing so, whatever happens, she has kept her honor because she tried with all in her to stop them from taking advantage. So that's how she kept her honor. Number two. What is it that the Godfather is getting in return? Is it an amount of money? No. Somebody tell me, what is it? Just say it.
Somebody's in his debt. Has to be loyal to him.
The Undertaker is going to be in his debt. He has to be loyal to him. He owes him, get this, an unspecified favor. Do you understand how big a deal an unspecified favor is? I could ask you to, or I could do a service for you. And you would always want to find out what that's going to cost before you make the deal. But the Godfather is going to provide proportional justice. He's not going to kill these boys. He's going to have them brutally beaten and maimed, at least wounded for a good long time. That's proportional justice. It's like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I hope you see that. He's not going to kill them because they brutalized the girl. But in return, the Undertaker owes him a service. It could be anything. Do you understand what a deal with the devil is? Because that's one. Right there. It's a Faustian bargain. And if, as time goes on, as cultured individuals, you'll learn of the story of Faust. Basically, it's of an ambitious person who makes a deal with the devil and then tries to get out of it. There's an Americanized version called The Devil and Daniel Webster, but basically it's a deal with the devil that you then try to weasel out of at the end. That is a Faustian bargain. Just put the pass on my desk, please. So the Undertaker, in so many words, is swearing away his soul. Because in agreeing to an unspecified favor, the Undertaker might be agreeing to murder kittens or give puppies the plague or kill. It doesn't matter. He doesn't know. That's bigger than any amount of money. It's a personal obligation of loyalty, and that is how deep patron-client relationships go. Now, any questions or comments about this? Wave your hand if I don't see it. Okay, I don't see any. For the fun of it, I'm going to show, if I can find it, that Zootopia clip. So yes, the Godfather scene lives on in many diverse fashions. With the Romans, there's very little that's halfway. When you give your loyalty, it's total. It is total. When you're a soldier, you have a total commitment. When you are a citizen, you have a total commitment. When you're in your family, there's no half measures. There's no, I'll do it a little bit. No, it's total commitment. Now, Roman citizenship. How do you become an American citizen? Well, you're born in the United States or you become naturalized, and after the age of 18, you get to vote. You have to pay taxes, obey the laws, go to the military if you're drafted, and, do a bunch of other civic duties. But as American citizens, you have certain rights, certain civil rights, and you have the right to vote free speech to free expression and so forth. But this is not the way it always has been. At the beginning of our republic, we had fairly strict voting rules. Only men of property would be allowed to vote. And obviously, this is of European descent. Why? Well, our nation was a nation of Europeans that had taken Indian land. Some Indians became American citizens, many did not. Women were not given the right to vote by anyone back then. The thought was ludicrous. Men of property pay taxes. Men of property have proven that they have the ability to become men of property or to maintain that property. They've developed a degree of understanding that makes them responsible. They have more skin in the game because it's not just their lives and their families that are part of the republic, it's their property, it's their business. So our founders restricted the vote, the franchise, to those men who were proven responsible, men of property. Throughout the late 17 and early 1800s, largely before the Civil War, the property restrictions were lowered and lowered and lowered to the point where basically any free-born man of European heritage or of naturalized citizenship could vote. This allowed presidents like Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, who started out life in log cabins, or at least the story of Lincoln was that he started out life in a log cabin. The idea of the frontiersman voter, because there were a lot of them. Now, when the Civil War begins, the thought is to, by the North, free the slaves and send them back to Africa, send them to Liberia or whatever. But during the middle and late part of the war, black American soldiers fought for the Union, and they fought really well. They suffered 70, 80, 90% casualties in some battles and kept fighting. Most military units, when they suffer 60% dead or wounded, break up, they fall apart. White units in the Civil War stayed together, and black units in the Civil War stayed together. What that meant was, to Lincoln anyway, that these black soldiers were earning the right for their race to stay in the United States and become Americans. So the plan to send them back to Africa was never really initiated by the government. There had been other abolitionist groups before the Civil War who sent them back to Africa. But Lincoln emancipated them, he freed them. And Lincoln set the stage for what would happen after the Civil War under radical Reconstruction, where black men are given American citizenship. So now, men of any race can vote. Now, after the Union Army left the South, after the occupation of the South stopped in the 1870s, blacks were in fact restricted from voting in many cases. There were poll taxes that were ridiculously expensive if you were black, cheap as dirt if you were white. There were literacy tests to see that voters could read, and Bubba, who can't read, was talked through it, but the most erudite black man would not pass it. These were called Jim Crow laws. And they restricted blacks from the right to vote for another 100 years, from the 1870s till the 1960s, so I guess another 90 years. Now, during World War I, women in Britain and later the United States began doing jobs that men normally did because many men were drafted into the military to fight in the war. So in 1919, in addition to the prohibition law making buying and selling alcohol illegal, women were given the right to vote. One of the selling points was, husbands, you'll get 2 votes, yours and your wife's. I do. Because my wife and I talk politics a lot, And we think the same. That's one of the common things we have. So we almost always, not entirely, but almost always vote in the identical fashion. However, women get the right to vote, and for the first time in American history, a man is elected president because he's so dreamy, handsome. Warren G. Harding. No joke. Part of the reason the Republican Party chooses him is that he is considered to be devilishly handsome by the women's. Still, women get the right to vote. We have now a society where pretty much anyone over the age of 21 gets the franchise who isn't a convicted felon. And then during the Vietnam War, that was reduced from 21 to 18 because if you have the duty of fighting and dying for your country in the jungles of Southeast Asia, you should at least have the right to vote for the politicians who sent you there. The Romans have a much simpler notion of citizenship. And this notion is taken by the science fiction writer Robert E. Heinlein in his novel Starship Troopers, which was made into a silly movie in the 90s. You may have seen. The book is much better. Heinlein revives the Roman concept of citizenship. You see, the senators were called conscript fathers. A conscript is a draftee. When the senators were walking to the Senate chambers carrying their little stools, which was part of the ritual of it, the people on the streets would say, "Salve, conscript fathers. Good day, greetings, conscript fathers." Because all the senators were veterans. They had served in the military, probably in combat many times. So, what does a Roman man need to do to become a citizen? He needs to serve in the military. Only veterans become citizens. Why? Because the Romans believe that unless you're willing to put your one and only life on the line for your country, you do not earn the right to determine its future. Only by putting your life at risk for the Republic do you become a citizen of the Republic. Only by risking maiming and death in battle for the Senate and people of Rome do you get to vote for political offices. Do you get to run for political office? Do you get to become a leader? Now, think about that. I have to admit, personally, I find this idea extremely appealing. Do we value that which we do not personally earn? I don't think so. In my life, I know that I value the things I've worked hardest for, because all of that hard work makes the achievement much more sweet. In a lot of schools, you have people who wanted to be novelists or advertising executives or stars in Hollywood or architects or scientists who failed and became teachers instead. I really never wanted to be anything other than what I am. And it wasn't easy for me because in the last year of college at Bates, I failed out. And it took me many years to get my degree at night school and many more years to get my teaching certification. I didn't fail because I was stupid. I failed because I was lazy and undisciplined. It wasn't until I was 35 that I became a teacher. And it was a long, hard road with much sacrifice on the part of me and my wife. So unlike my colleagues, and it's not so true here at this school. Almost everyone at this school wants to do what they're doing. But at a lot of the other schools I've worked at, you got a bunch of frustrated people who think that teaching is what they settled for. Sad. The Romans believed that you earn the right to vote, the moral right to vote, the legitimate right to vote, by putting your life on the line. Consequently, what kind of citizens do they have? They have involved citizens. Think of what they did to earn the right. They have citizens who pay attention. Like anyone else, the Roman citizen is just as capable of being fooled and tricked as anyone else, but they care. Now, in Heinlein's book, Starship Troopers, you don't have to be a citizen. You can become the richest man in town. You just don't serve in the military and you don't get to vote. But you can work hard, you can own property, you can build a business, you can get married. You have every privilege of being a member of society except you can't vote. Voting is restricted to veterans. Service equals citizenship. Now you might ask, well, that's great, but what about people who are physically or mentally incapable of serving in the forces? What about them? If your system, if the Roman system is a moral one, how do you do that? Heinlein has people who are physically or mentally unfit for service volunteer for scientific experiments or do dangerous jobs that they are capable of. The moral equivalency is a willingness to endure risk, existential risk. And if you do that for a certain amount of time, you earn the right to vote. If you do not do that, you do not have the right to vote. What do you think? Should there be some kind of restriction? I've heard people argue, well, we should let only educated people vote. Really? Who defines what's educated? I can tell you that most college professors, very educated people, highly accomplished in their fields, are completely impractical thinkers. They're great theoreticians with no life experience. Many of them tend to be leftists, communists, Marxists, anarcho-syndicalists, because in their ivory tower, theory equates to reality. Whereas most people don't think that way, and most people don't want to live like that, at least not in the United States. So who determines what is educated? Do any of you wish to explore an idea of citizenship that involves something other than being born a citizen and waiting until you're a certain age, or becoming a naturalized citizen? Should there be others?
I think, like, when someone comes into the United States, they have to take a bunch of tests to become a citizen and study a lot. And I think that if you're going to vote, you should, or become a citizen, you should take those tests even if you were born in the U.S. because they teach stuff, and you can teach about politics and thinking for yourself and not trusting everything and just a broad subject, but they should be educated on voting and what it means to be a citizen rather than just being born.
In theory, every high school graduate should be able to pass the citizenship test. At my old school in Maine, that was a graduation requirement. They had made it one while I was teaching there. Everyone had to pass the citizenship test. Now, I can tell you, there are 2 or 3 questions on that test I disagree with the answers. I'm a historian. I'm reasonably well educated when it comes to political science and civics. I've taught them. And I think that they have a couple of wrong answers. But fine, okay. You take a fairly simple test, fewer than 100 questions, and you get your citizenship. I wouldn't mind that. But what about the illiterate? Well, you can have the test read to them. But isn't that unfair to poor people and people of color? What that would be argued, because poor people and people of color would be assumed to be less educated than white people. I don't believe that, but that's what people would argue.
Well, instead of like just having someone be there, you could have them be like, hey, if you cannot understand this, then we have someone here, and they should tell it to everyone who takes the test.
Okay, you just have to make sure that when they're reading the test or explaining it, they're not giving the test's answers away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually easier to do than you might think. Do you want to answer A, B, or C? You want to answer A, B, C, or D? Little cues people give away. They do. Okay, so as simple as citizenship test. I can see a lot of people getting behind that. Are there any other ideas? I'm just going to see if anyone else has one before I go back. let her carry so much weight. Go ahead.
On that, we could have an AI read it, like Siri, because their voices are so monotone. You just want to get it done with, so you got to answer it.
Yeah, but that gives AI even more power than it already has.
Well, if you
And
just give it a script to read.
Look up what Cylons are. Look up what Terminators are. And you'll understand the nicer versions of a cybernetically dominated future. But yeah, I get your point, actually. Your point is you have a neutral recording read, and that's what people hear. That's not bad. If I were king of the world, I would do something like that. I do believe citizenship should be earned. I think people would value it more. But, I'm crazy and I'm an evil right wing jerk, so, what we have now is certainly nicer and easier for more people to vote. You know what I don't believe? And we can talk about this for a moment, too. I don't believe in having a day off for elections. I don't believe in busing people to the polls. I don't believe in rewarding people for voting. I never wear one of those little cutesy little stickers that say I voted. I don't like that. Voting is a choice. And if you don't care enough to make it possible to vote, I don't care what you think. Stay home. Really, it disturbs me when people talk about having a maximum number of people voting and doing what you can to encourage people to vote. Voting is a privilege. It's not something that everyone has to do. And if you don't care enough to inform yourself, and you don't care enough to get to the polls, you're probably not going to make a wise decision. I mean, at the very least, a restriction of voting should be if you choose not to vote, you should be left alone. Of course, if you choose not to vote and you get involved in political discussions, everyone should laugh at you because you did nothing to further your point of view. Should we make it? Yes.
So, I can see where you're coming from on that, but I also kind of disagree with it because
Please.
There are many families that have to work so hard and long hours to provide for their family, and if the polling places around them are open only for a certain amount of the election day, and they have to take care of kids, they have to do their really long jobs or 2 jobs, and they won't be able to physically make it to the polling place. Isn't that kind of unfair for them?
Well, we do have options for absentee voting. And absentee voting is different from the kind of shenanigans that went on in 2020. To get an absentee ballot, you have to apply for it. I have no problem with a family who is working triple shifts on election day getting an absentee ballot and voting in that way. I think that's absolutely reasonable because the person who is voting initiates. What I want to see is the voter initiating the process. I agree that there are always exceptions, and there has to be a system for those exceptions, and I think absentee ballot is. I'll get to you if you have more to say, and then I'll go to Chase.
Yeah, but with the absentee ballot, there is still room for fraud, because someone, could come in and, a babysitter, the kids are home, and they see the absentee ballot, and they can write on it or send it in, or it can be sent to the wrong address.
There is that, but it's less prone to fraud than just blindly mailing ballots out by the thousands, which did happen in several communities in 2020. The idea is, these are old voting lists. Let's just blindly mail. An absentee ballot, because it's initiated by the person theoretically will be expecting it. And if somehow the babysitter absconds with it, at some point the person's going to realize, hey, I didn't get my ballot. And they can then call the polling place and something can be done. But yeah, nothing is perfect. Unless you want to do retina tests and fingerprint checks at the point of voting, which actually would be okay with me. But yeah, no, the idea, I get your point. I do. Yes.
I don't think my point is super relevant.
Come on.
Well, I was going to say that it's kind of their choices if they have those kids and they're working their jobs, because you're really the master of your own destiny. If you're in a situation where you can't take a half hour on your lunch break to go to the polls, then that's probably from your choices,
Yeah, very few people are going to be solidly working. Also, you can bring your kids to the polling place.
Yeah.
I've seen it done. Some of them are loud. But they're there, and at least mom is voting, or dad is voting, or whoever. Point is taken. In Europe, what they do is they have an election holiday, and nobody has to work unless there are essential services. Obviously, if the police all took off to vote, there'd be problems. Anyway, that's the system. So, the last thing I'm going to say today is this. You know how we have envy as an allowable vice in our country? You can't make fun of ethnicities anymore. You can't make fun of handicaps anymore. It's even difficult to make fun of just stupidity anymore. But you can make fun of the rich. You're allowed to hate the rich. Well, in Rome, the social class system was reflected in the military. Romans bought their own gear, their own weapons. Rich people, therefore, could afford a breastplate, greaves, a shield, a helmet, a spear, a sword, and they fought in the front lines because they were fully armored. The middle class could afford maybe a helmet, a shield, and a spear. They didn't have breastplate or greaves. They fought in the second line behind their bosses. The poorest Romans could afford a helmet and a spear. They fought in the third line. So the richest took the greatest risks in battle. The middle class, the second greatest risks. The poor, the third greatest risks. What this means is, unlike in America, where during the Civil War, people could buy their way out of the draft, a rich boy could pay a poor boy to take his place, which I think is fundamentally immoral. In Rome, the rich were up front in battle. The poor were protected by their richer neighbors. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Come again.